Great. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sticking around for the last session of the day. I really appreciate yeah, everybody sticking around. I'm Emmanuel Rapicavoli. I manage the tribal drinking water section in EPA Region 9, and I have a couple of my colleagues with me. I'll let them quickly introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Young, and I am in our Tribal Infrastructure program at EPA Region 9.
Hi, my name is Sarah McGilloway. I also work for the Tribal Infrastructure Program. I'm the lead contact for our two emerging contaminant programs we'll be discussing briefly today. And I am the project officer for tribal utilities in the Reno and Western Arizona IHS districts.
Great. Do you want to advance? Great. So today it's an exciting time in tribal infrastructure. Many of you are hopefully familiar with kind of our tribal set-asides, both the drinking water and clean water set-asides off of the SRF. With the passage, we're going into year 3 of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and what I'm hoping we can focus on more today is our new programs to address emerging contaminants in drinking water and the replacement of lead service lines. But before we get started, before we get into those topics, I'm going to give kind of a brief background on our funding for this year for the base programs. And we have a lot of new funding on both the drinking water and clean water set-aside programs, which is exciting. And we also have a lot of new staff, so we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. Our team is growing, or has grown a lot in the last year, so you'll see a lot of new faces to work with, a lot of new funding. So again, an exciting time. I'm going to start with the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program, and just give kind of some base eligibility and how to apply for this funding. So all federally recognized tribes are eligible for Clean Water Indian Set-Aside funding. The funds can fund planning, design, and construction of tribal wastewater treatment facilities. And the projects, unlike our drinking water program, have to be on the SDS list. This is the Sanitation Deficiency System list maintained by the Indian Health Service. No matching funds are required for this funding. Next slide. So we can fund pretty much the nuts and bolts of planning and design for sewer collection and wastewater treatment infrastructure, including collector sewer pipelines, septic systems, on-site wastewater systems, follow-up and drafting of as-built, and all the preliminary engineering kind of associated with designing and building wastewater infrastructure. What we can't fund, unfortunately, similar to our drinking water program, is funding for the operations and maintenance of the utility. We're not in a great position to fund emergency repairs to water systems or to sewer systems. We also can't fund indoor residential plumbing facilities or the construction of treatment works that don't benefit homes. These programs are really focused on funding residential homes. So yeah. Slide. Thanks. How to apply. So the key here is making sure your project's, again, on the SDS list. And that's where you would contact your IHS area director. And these are the contacts for each of the 4 areas we work with in the region. So we work with the California, Navajo, Phoenix, and Tucson areas. Getting your project needs listed on SDS informs not only the funding that comes to the region, this is an important piece, getting your needs on the SDS list increases the amount of funding coming to Region 9 specifically to fund wastewater infrastructure in that area. But it also obviously gets your project on the list to increase its priority for both EPA and IHS funding. So if you're not already working with IHS, these are the primary contacts to ensure your project is on SDS. Great. So I'll pivot to the drinking water tribal set-aside program. If you take away anything from this presentation today, November 30th is our deadline for accepting applications for fiscal year 24 funding. In that project application, we have a 2-page project application. It's online on our website, and that's the basic requirement to apply by this deadline. If you're applying for construction funding, we ask that you complete a preliminary engineering report, and that you also have a tribal endorsement. But I just want to reiterate, November 30th is our project deadline, and we're happy to meet with you before then to make sure we get your project needs and an application in before then. The majority of our funding is awarded through an interagency agreement with IHS. We also award funding via direct grants. And in the last few years, the number of direct grants has increased in our region, particularly with the influx of bill funding. We're issuing a lot more direct grants. So if that is something that interests you, it's something we're able to do in the region. Again, matching funds are not typically required. And the way EPA ranks and prioritizes our funding is through a health-based ranking system, which I'll get into in a second. So we unlike the Clean Water Program, we do not utilize the SDS to rank and prioritize funding for drinking water. We use a health-based ranking system that considers kind of the highest health priority that a project addresses. So the top priority for us is projects that address bacteriological contamination, unfiltered surface water not meeting treatment requirements, and significant deficiencies or sanitary defects are the kind of highest ranking projects that we fund. And then we kind of move into water supply deficiencies. And we have a couple categories for ranking water supply deficiencies where the water system is serving fewer than 30 gallons per capita per day. That has a very high priority ranking for us. And then followed by chemical contamination. Arsenic is ranked higher than other MCLs, such as lead, et cetera, but chemical MCLs are very, very high ranking. Then we get into the water supply deficiency levels where a water system serving between 30 and 150 gallons per capita per day. Those are also very high ranking projects. And then projects that address other health deficiencies. So it may be a deficiency in your water system that's not significant, but would address a public health concern. Let's see, I'll speak a little bit to eligibility requirements. The project has to serve a public water system. We can fund both community and non-community water systems. But it has to serve a water system. Water systems can't be in significant non-compliance with drinking water requirements. We require a certified operator prior to award of the funding, and a PER, as I mentioned before, is a requirement prior to construction funding. But we can fund planning. We can fund kind of pre-development activities to get you to the PER stage. And the other eligibility requirement is the utility has TMF capacity, or technical, managerial, and financial capacity to run the water system. Okay. In terms of eligibility, we can fund projects that rehabilitate or develop new sources, install or upgrade treatment facilities, install or upgrade storage facilities, replacing transmission lines, water efficiency projects, or again, development of a PER. What we can't fund, similar to clean water, we can't fund O&M activities, including compliance monitoring, projects that are primarily addressing future growth, or land acquisition, water rights, reservoirs, or projects that are primarily intended for commercial use. So again, similar to clean water, this is focused on funding funding projects that serve tribal homes. Let's see. And this, I think this slide speaks a little to our solicitation process. So again, key date here is November 30th for us. We're at where kind of the star is on this slide, where we're soliciting projects. And at the end of this presentation, we'll talk through who the contacts are for our program and who you would first go to ask any questions about your project proposal. Getting that project proposal in by November 30th. Then we'll evaluate it and come back and issue a draft ranking letter. And we'll likely have questions or follow-up information requests about the project, and that usually happens around January to March timeframe. We'll evaluate those responses that we get in the springtime and issue a final ranking and please apply letter, typically in the April to June timeframe. And then we'll award grants and interagency agreements in the July to September timeframe. All right, this slide just gives an overview of the funding that we awarded in the last year. So last year we awarded $35 million to fund tribal infrastructure projects, and I'm hopeful we'll get to award more this year. The bulk of this are for the two base programs, so that blue piece of the pie is all of our drinking water base and bill supplement, and the green pie is the clean water base and bill supplement, and then the orange piece I think we awarded $3.5 million to fund emerging contaminant projects. We have more funding available there, and we're hoping to increase that number in the next year. So the next few slides from Sarah will really get to that, speak to that. I think, and this slide just kind of highlights what we're anticipating for FY24 in terms of how to apply. There's that QR code that links to our website that has the application materials on it. We're accepting proposals by November 30th for drinking water kind of base eligibilities and also any emerging contaminant projects through that same application. We're also accepting lead service line projects, and this is on a more kind of rotating basis. So you're not tied to that November 30th deadline, but if you came to some of our earlier presentations today, there's urgency to get a lot of that work done before the deadline next year. So I'd encourage folks that have those types of projects to apply as soon as possible. Wastewater, again, is through the SDS list. One last bit, the solicitation will also consider funding under one of our WIN-funded programs that addresses compliance needs and wastewater, drinking water infrastructure in small, underserved, and disadvantaged communities. So there's a little bit of funding there as well, about maybe $800,000 per year. So one funding application to make it all simple, and you would be kind of considered through all the various funding program lenses. So that's kind of my quick overview on our base programs. Any questions that have come up, and we'll have time at the end again for questions. Looks good.
Very well. Is this one on? Sounds like yes. Hi, everyone. My name again is Sarah McGilloway. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge I might be wheezing or coughing whilst I talk to you today. I apologize for those interruptions. Given we're in a COVID-conscious world, I feel obligated to offer some reassurance that I am not ill in an infectious sense. The microphone will be safe. I have a rare non-contagious lung disease, which incidentally I got after exposure to aerial contaminants years ago. So I'm uniquely aware of the effects of contaminants on our bodies and on our planet. And that provides a larger layer of personal motivation to discuss our drinking water emerging contaminant programming with you today. Today we'll be outlining 2 emerging contaminant funding opportunities in Region 9, And we'll discuss more context for this photo later, but we are looking at manganese contamination leaving a distribution line of a tribal water utility. So we have 2 new grant programs this year which address emerging contaminants in drinking water. One is the Drinking Water Tribal Set-Aside Emerging Contaminants Program, which we abbreviate to be DWTSA EC. And the other is the Emerging Contaminants in Small and Disadvantaged Communities Grant, which we abbreviate to the EC-SDC. So some alphabet soup for you. But the programs do have some similar eligibilities and they can fund similar types of projects. Both of these programs must be otherwise drinking water tribal set-aside eligible. So that means they must meet the requirements that Emmanuel kindly just listed for us. The projects must serve a public water system, and both of these projects do emphasize addressing PFAS analytes in drinking water. However, projects that address any contaminant listed on any of EPA's emerging contaminant candidate lists are eligible. So both grants have $7 million each allocated for fiscal year 2024 for a combined $14 million in potential funding to address emerging contaminants in drinking water. There's no cost share requirement, there's no underserved community requirement for either. One notable difference is that for the EC-SDC, projects must be serving a small community. And EPA has here defined a small community as one with a population of less than 10,000 individuals served. And I would like to clarify that's the population being served by the water utility, not the population of the tribe. So this is one of 2 slides I've put together for you, which list project types which are eligible under these programs. These are just some examples, but the guidance provides more detail. And we'll discuss the guidance in a bit more depth as we continue to talk, but it's the same document Emmanuel was referencing. So some projects include completing pre-development activities, such as determining if and where contamination exists, conducting initial monitoring to establish a baseline understanding, developing project planning and preliminary engineering documents, and designing projects. Both of these programs are also eligible to establish technical assistance to evaluate emerging contaminant problems, programs to provide household water quality testing, including testing for unregulated contaminants, and activities necessary and appropriate for tribes to respond to an emerging contaminant. In addition to this, the EC-SDC program, so the one that serves small communities, can fund laboratory testing equipment such as supplying water kits and instructions to households and source water protection activities. So there's quite a few types of eligible projects. And again, a more comprehensive list is available on our guidance, and I'll describe how to access that later. There are some contaminants that have already been identified or are being addressed currently by tribal utilities in Region 9. So you might consider if these issues are also affecting your water system. We're going to take a focused look at some contaminants, and I'll introduce 3 now. For some general context, know that manganese occurs naturally in soils in some parts of our region. Manganese builds up in pipes and can make water appear black. Cyanotoxins from harmful algal blooms may affect systems with surface water intakes and can be a seasonal issue. And PFAS, of course, if you attended the earlier talk, refer to groups of synthetic chemicals that can occur in drinking water. There are various potential effects of manganese contamination depending on the quantity of manganese and its location within the distribution system. So manganese is regulated by a secondary maximum contaminant level of 0.05 milligrams per liter. And the secondary standard was established to address aesthetic issues in the line, which manganese can affect color, taste, and odor of water. Manganese contamination can make water black and may smell like oil or sewage. But it can also cause operational issues in your water system. It can build up in pipes and affect water pressure. Some research does show manganese contamination can have harmful effects on infants and children. And EPA has established a lifetime health advisory level of 0.3 milligrams per liter which means adverse health effects are not expected below this level. EPA has already funded a project to perform ice pigging to remove manganese buildup in a tribal utilities distribution lines. The photo that you see is showing what came out of the distribution lines after this treatment was performed. And we've also, and more typically, funded projects to remove manganese at the entry point via the installation of centralized treatment. If you think manganese is affecting your system, I'd encourage you to apply for funding under one of these two programs, Next, we'll talk about cyanotoxins. Cyanotoxins are released from harmful algal blooms. Algae can overproduce in certain systems and leach these contaminants into the water. Tomorrow morning, there will be a talk about harmful algal blooms that I'd encourage you to attend if you believe this might be affecting your water system. EPA has already provided funding to develop a PER to investigate treatment alternatives to remove cyanotoxins from a tribal utilities water supply. If you believe cyanotoxins are affecting your system, I would encourage you to also apply for funding. I'll just note that cyanotoxins, again, from harmful algal blooms, can occur in systems that rely on surface water. They can spike seasonally. Not all algal blooms do produce cyanotoxins. The most common cyanotoxins are microcystins, cylindrospermopsin, anatoxins, and saxitoxins. And two of these have health advisory limits that have been set for EPA, but all cyanotoxins are eligible for funding under these two grants. Cylindrospermopsin has a drinking water health advisory of 0.7 micrograms per liter for infants and young children, and 3 micrograms per liter for school-aged children and adults. And microcystins have a drinking water health advisory of 0.3 micrograms per liter for infants and children, and 1.6 micrograms per liter for school-aged children and young adults. I'd like to just take a moment to show you how our ranking process works for projects like this. This ranking applies to both of the EC programs because the eligibilities are very similar. Note that PFAS projects and projects that address contaminants with health advisories are prioritized. In making this ranking, EPA consulted several different utilities so that we could adequately understand where the needs were and address emerging contaminants in the region. And so we've made some changes to preceding ranking criteria we had from the beginning of the consultation. If you take note of category 6, this is a new category. This enabled us to address manganese at that secondary standard level, which dealt with aesthetic issues. Category 5 is a revised category, which includes contaminants that pose a health risk at a level that is not an EPA standard or health advisory, but because before we only addressed contaminants that EPA did not have health advisories for. So this includes manganese at a lower level than the health advisory, but a higher level than the secondary standard. There are some general changes to how we have addressed manganese issues. So now manganese could potentially fit into categories 2, 4, 6, or 7, depending on the presentation of issues within the system. And of course, we mentioned PFAS earlier in this talk and in a few other talks. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances are a group of synthetic chemicals that have been used in a wide array of consumer and industrial products since the 1940s. So there are long-chain and short-chain PFAS. Some long-chain PFAS have been phased out in the early 2000s of industrial use, but manufacturers then just replace them with short-chain PFAS, like Gen X and PFBs. The toxicity of these compounds is an ongoing effort. So the most widely studied of these are those long-chain ones that had been phased out earlier. Some of these compounds do have a health advisory, some do not, but most likely will. What we do know is PFAS are mobile, persistent in the environment, bioaccumulate, and are associated with adverse health effects in humans. We've mentioned this sampling program at length before in other talks, so I'll just take an opportunity to plug it in here as well. The region is offering free PFAS sampling to tribal systems. This is available to systems we regulate. It is no cost to the tribe. It is a voluntary project. And technical assistance providers will provide training on sample collection, which is especially important given the cross-contamination potential being fairly high for PFAS. Samples are taken at all sources and entry points. And I would encourage you all to get involved in that. If you do test positive for PFAS, the project manager serving your region will provide guidance based on the sampling results. And I'd encourage you to contact either your area program manager, whose information again will be posted at the end of this presentation, or Ian Chen, whose contact information is posted here now, if you are interested in participating. I'll give you a moment to write down Ian's name or take a photo if you'd like. Okay, so how does one apply for funding for either of these programs? If you're interested in applying for funding to address emerging contaminants, a good place to start is our fiscal year 24 guidance. So you can scan this QR code, follow the website down towards the documents, click on the Drinking Water Tribal Set Aside fiscal year 24 guidance, and review that document. Note that proposals are due soon on November 30th. And just like with the base guidance mentioned earlier, proposals can be submitted via email according to the instructions written down. The specific requirements for what we need in your proposal might vary based on what kind of project you're interested in doing. But on this QR code, amongst that list of documents I was referencing, you can see a proposal form there to fill out. If at any point during the application process you run into questions, I would be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. And I'm fortunate to have many helpful colleagues who have more years of experience than me that can also help understand this process. Thank you for your time. Before I do pass this talk over to my colleague, I have a few minutes for any specific questions about EC funding programs, and there will be an opportunity for additional questions at the end. Yes.
Hello. Okay, I actually had a couple questions for the section previously. For the clean water set aside said that the construction of the wastewater treatment plants that don't serve residential can't be funded. Can it serve residential and a business such as a casino?
I'm sorry, did you hear that?
Repeat that into the mic. Sorry. Could you repeat your question? I
Maybe
couldn't
we can
hear.
pass this microphone into the audience.
Okay, is this one not working well, or is this better?
Oh, I hear you better now.
Now I can
I'm
hear
sorry
you,
about
yeah.
that. Could
Okay,
you
no
repeat that,
worries.
please?
So for the clean water set aside, you said that the construction of a wastewater treatment plant that doesn't serve residential areas, that's not fundable, but what if it serves partial residential and a business such as a casino?
Yeah.
Yes.
If it serves a combo of residential and non-residential connections, it would be eligible, and it should be able to get on the SDS list. In order to get on the project has to be on the SDS list, and I think IHS's criteria is similar to ours, that it would need to serve tribal homes. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Got it.
it's eligible for sure.
Okay, got it. And then another question linking onto that. What about the reconstruction or expansion of an existing wastewater plant? Would that also be fundable?
You asked about the construction or expansion of an existing wastewater plant.
Mhm.
Yeah, that similarly, if it's eligible, if it serves tribal homes, that would be eligible for funding.
Okay.
Generally, it has to address a health deficiency to get on SDS. And so if the intention behind the expansion is upgrading facilities, yes. If it's, to serve non-tribal or commercial facilities, then it may get into a gray area of not being able to be eligible.
Okay, awesome.
That
Thank
helps.
you. And I had one more question for the tribal water set aside. Where was it? Oh, let's see. So can you fund the preliminary engineering reports for SCADA systems?
For what type of systems?
SCADA?
CEDA.
Like SCADA, like well monitoring systems.
Telemetry, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, a SCADA system. Thank you.
No problem.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
can fund SCADA. So, yes, that's an eligible type of infrastructure that's fundable under the drinking water set aside. Great.
Are there any additional questions about EC funding or anything else we've covered thus far?
Sorry, I have one more question. You had said that a certified operator is required prior to an award for the tribal set aside. Would a consultant that's hired by the tribe be acceptable, or does it have to be a person in the water department?
The certified operator requirement is for construction funding, and the operator has to be certified at the level required by EPA. So EPA would generally be regulating the water system, and they have to be certified at that level. I think you asked if a consultant could be used. I think if the tribe retains a contract operator that could fulfill that requirement, that's a possibility. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. I'll pass the mic off to my colleague, Emma.
All right, can everyone hear me? Cool. All right, so I'll be talking about our lead service line replacement program. This is also funding that we have under bill. It's funding that we will be receiving for 5 years. Last year, we received about $26 million for fiscal year 2023, and we anticipate to receive the same amount this year for fiscal year 2024. Over the 5 years of bill funding, Region 9 does expect to receive about $125 million. So we do have a lot of funding for this program. So I'll talk a little bit about the background for this. We did have a session earlier where we went over service line inventories. So if there are more questions, we do have both of these presentations available, I think, through the conference. So this funding is bill funding to investigate and remove lead service lines. The projects under this funding must be drinking water tribal set aside eligible and be a lead service line replacement project or associated directly connected to the identification, planning, design, and replacement of lead service lines. A lead service line for this funding is defined as a service line that's made of lead or a galvanized service line that's downstream of lead or an unknown material. And this is previously or currently downstream of either of these materials. In our guidance and in my presentation, you'll hear me refer to them as GERs. So that's just the galvanized requiring replacement based on this definition. And other components that are eligible for replacement with this funding are lead goosenecks, pigtails, and connectors. And if you look at this photo in this slide, you can see all of those components as part of that. So eligible projects that are under this funding, there's 2 main categories of projects. The first one is the service line inventory projects. These projects aim to determine the materials of all applicable service lines to the extent that they are eligible for replacement and or are determined to be non-lead. And this can be for mapping or locating of lead service lines and any investigatory work that's needed. In our region, we're mostly seeing potholing projects as this to get a direct visual of what the line is. But this can be development or updating of service line inventories and the methods of investigation, as I mentioned, records reviews, visual observation through potholing, water quality sampling, excavation, vacuum or hydro excavation, or any other emerging technologies. And then the other project that's considerable under this funding is the lead service line replacement project. So this would be any project that would be replacing any of these defined lead service lines or components. In our region, we don't anticipate to find too many lead service lines, but if we do, then this would be kind of a secondary project that might come after the service line inventories are completed. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about what the service line inventory requirements for compliance are for our tribal water systems. And then just a couple notes that the replacement projects must include the entire service line. So this includes both the line of the utility all the way to the home. So we're anticipating that there will be, you'll need to identify what the lines are that are privately owned as well. And then meters are not an allowable cost under these projects. So this is the funding methodology, and you'll find this on our webpage as well. So you can go through this if you're looking at what a potential project for your water system might be. The 3 green and the 1 blue squares, those are kind of the projects that would be eligible for this, including a service line inventory project or a project that's to further investigate any unknowns in your system. And then a planning project for a potential replacement project, and then any of the actual construction for a lead service line or GER that's identified. And the other thing that I want to point out with this picture is that we do plan to fund all eligible projects that we do receive. These projects are received on a rolling basis. So the November 30th date that's been talked about, that's not applicable here. But the date that is, I guess, applicable to this is that the service line inventories are due to EPA on October 16th of 2024, which is about a year from now. And because of how our funding process works and getting out the actual award of money, I'll go through that timeline a little bit later, but it is really important if you are anticipating submitting any proposals for this funding, either for a service line inventory project or for a replacement project, that you do get those in. So under the lead and copper rule revisions, this is something that's required of all community water systems and non-transient, non-community water systems. And so your program manager from EPA Region 9 would have sent out an inventory form and information about this. So if you have not received that or you're not sure, then you can definitely get in contact with us and your program manager. And then I would also just add that it is rare that we're able to actually fund staff to do work that meets a compliance requirement. So this is a pretty good opportunity, and since it is required for all water systems, definitely take advantage of it. So these are the 4 inventory categories. And then there's a screenshot of the inventory form at the top of this slide as well. And everything that's in blue there, I know it's kind of small, but those are what's required for identifying what the service lines are. So the 4 categories are lead service lines, which are made of lead, the GERs, which also are required in replacement projects, and then non-lead, which is a line that is identified as not containing lead, and there's no replacement project that would be required, and then lead status unknown. So for the initial submission of the service line inventories, it's okay if you have unknowns. That can be something that can be part of your submission for your proposal for any further investigatory work that you need. But anything that is left as a lead status unknown after any investigatory work, or if it's turned in on October 16th, 2024, then any galvanized lines behind or downstream of that will be required for replacement based on the assumption that all unknowns that were installed prior to the ban on lead will be considered potentially lead status unknown. So it's really important that if you do have a lot of unknowns in your systems or you don't have records, to kind of work with us on what would work best for an investigation project. And we do have funding for this, so there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to work with you on that. But just being mindful that on October 16th of 2024, if there are unknowns and there are any galvanized that are downstream, you may be needing to do a replacement project. All right, so if you're at my presentation earlier, I went through this slide a few times. We're only going to go through it once here, but this is a really important slide, just kind of looking at how the replacement projects come after the service line inventory. So the first kind of process of utilizing this funding for water systems is the service line inventory. And we do currently have an in-kind contract with RCAC to help water systems complete service line inventories. And this can include record reviews, which can include anything from construction and plumbing codes, permits, any existing records that the tribe has, including distribution maps, drawings, historical records on each service connection, meter installation records, historical capital improvement or master plans. They can help with all of this review. This is also a great opportunity to have a direct grant to the tribe to do this work that is a compliance requirement. And you can also fund any of the grant administration work, any record review, or any work that's associated with the service line inventorying. So if your tribe has the capability to do potholing or any of the investigatory work, that can be paid to the staff through a direct grant. And then additionally, for the initial completion of the service lines, as I mentioned, having the unknowns is okay. You'll just want to make sure that you work with your program manager and with me for kind of what that project scope looks like, so that we can make sure that we're funding all of the work that needs to be done. And if the unknowns can be easily determined, then it is best to identify them in your initial service line inventory. Additionally, you can work with IHS and do an interagency agreement. If you do plan to do that, then we'll just want to make sure that when you do the proposal that you do have that approval with IHS, and that's part of the proposal form. And if your tribe does not want to manage a grant or to contract with someone, and you think that it would be easier if EPA would manage a contract, that's something that we also have the capability to do. And if that's something that you're interested in doing specifically, definitely would encourage you to reach out to me so that we can talk about what that would look like specifically for what type of work it is and what kind of contract we would need in place for that. The pros of having a contract managed by EPA is that you don't have to do any of the managerial oversight, and it's all managed by EPA. But the cons are that you'll still need to have staff and operators meet with whoever's contracted out to meet with them, and that's not a reimbursable cost since it's being managed by EPA. So just something to think about if you are looking at that. And we don't anticipate a lot of these lead service line replacement projects in our region. We have only received 10% of our service line inventories, so we're still anticipating a lot of that work to be done. But it is something that should be done and can be used by this funding. So definitely encourage, this funding to be utilized for the service line inventories. Okay, and then the presentation should be a picture of how to apply with a QR code, and that QR code does go to our drinking water tribal set-aside lead service line replacement webpage. This will have all of the information, our proposal form, and it'll have all the information, my contact information, and a lot of the information that's been reviewed in this presentation. And just want to reiterate that this is accepted on a rolling basis. So we don't have a hard deadline for applications or for proposals, but definitely just being mindful of that October 16th, 2024 deadline if you are planning to use any of this funding for service line inventories. And then all of the proposals that we receive must include the proposal form, which is kind of a simplified Excel sheet, and then tribal government endorsement, a detailed cost estimate, and then for any of the replacement project proposals, additionally including a planning document. Okay, so this is kind of the time frame that we're looking at for the turnaround from proposal to us processing and awarding the funds for projects, and it's about 6 months. So the initial step is that the tribe submits a proposal with the information that was on the prior slide. We'll have 2 months to review the applications for completeness, let you know if there's anything that we need additionally for the work, and then the tribe will have a month to respond to our comments. And the third step will be the final documents that are submitted for the grant interagency agreement or in-kind services. And we'll process and award the funds for the project. And so this entire time frame should take about 6 months. So just being very mindful that, the October 16th date is about a year from now. So we really encourage you to get these proposals in for the service line inventories as soon as possible, especially if you do anticipate needing contract services or wanting EPA to oversee any contracts. Yes. So this is my contact information, and then I also have the contact information of Jason Gambatis. He's one of our leads for the service line inventories. So you can reach out to either of us. I'm more on the funding side, and he'll be more on the project side. So thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, hopefully I can answer them. Yes.
Hi again. You mentioned a planning document. What is there a template for that, or you have an example of what you're looking for that?
Yeah, so for the planning document, it'll kind of depend on what the project is exactly. So, like a planning, like a preliminary engineering report or something that's a little bit more simplified than that. And if there is any construction that's being done on private property, then the right-of-ways. So it kind of depends on the project. I know it's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but we're definitely trying to make sure that, that'll be a conversation. You can send me an email if you have a specific project in mind.
I was just curious if there's any exemptions to the lead service line project or inventory, especially if it's like a new water system that was built, say, in 2018. Would those systems still need to do an inventory?
Yeah, so if you do have documentation that shows that the water system was built and had lines that were built after the lead ban, which in our region is like 1986 to 1989, I believe, then that's sufficient documentation. You'll just note that when you turn in the inventory form. So you still have to fill it out, but it is kind of a more simplified process if you do have those records and that information.
So this goes to the bill funding. And I think I heard this morning maybe that some of it was going to come from the states, or from EPA to the states, but from this program. This is direct EPA to tribes, right?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
This is all of this funding that we're talking about is taken as 2% off of the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds. So there's a national tribal set aside of 2% of those funds, and then it's allocated to the regions based on different formulas. But the states are not involved.
All right, and if there are no more questions, do you want to pull up the?
Oh, sure. Yeah, do you want to advance the slide? Great. Great. Well, thank you all for sticking with us. We had 2 more slides really just to go over our contact information. And I think as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, a lot of new faces on our team and new program context. But the basic structure of our team now is kind of bifurcated by infrastructure and drinking water regulatory compliance. So this first slide speaks to the coordination and the program leads. So I'm again Emmanuel. I manage the program. I shouldn't have been speaking today. I should have said this at the outset. Nancy Sockabasin coordinates both of these programs, the drinking water tribal set aside and the clean water Indian set aside. Her contact info is there. And she is the primary point of contact on kind of the overall coordination. And then we're organized by project officers. According to kind of IHS, we're aligned with the IHS district offices. So we have six contacts listed below, and those are the primary contacts based on kind of aligning with your IHS district office area, folks. And those folks are going to be your primary points of contact on all your infrastructure needs and funding applications. And then the second slide is our drinking water program managers. And these are your familiar faces who work with your drinking water system on regulatory compliance. So these are the folks that send you monitoring schedules and do sanitary surveys every year. They also have a lot of great insight into helping scope drinking water projects. They have a lot of insight into the needs and how a project would rank. So they're also a great resource if you have questions about funding and kind of helping to pre-plan an infrastructure project. So I wanted to make sure folks had all the contacts available. Right. Any other questions before we close? How many people are going to submit project proposals? Yay. Yay.
Awesome.
That's great. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for taking the time this afternoon.
Thank you.